8 months into our new life in Pinewood Heights, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that we were trespassing in someone else's world. Sure, the neighborhood looked picture-perfect with its manicured lawns and coordinated mailboxes, but beneath that polished veneer lurked something cold and unwelcoming, like a surgical theater before the patient arrives. I should know. I spend most of my waking hours in those theaters. Dr. Chen, we need you in OR 3. The aortic dissection is unstable. The nurse's voice crackled through my phone at 5:30 a.m., yanking me from a rare 4 consecutive hours of sleep. On my way, I mumbled, already sliding into the clothes I'd laid out the night before. A ritual from my residency days that I couldn't shake. Efficiency above all else. I tiptoed past my son's room, where 6-year-old Elijah slept soundly, his wild black curls splayed across his dinosaur pillowcase. My mother was asleep in the guest room across the hall. At 72, the strain of caring for an energetic 6-year-old was taking its toll. But she'd insisted on moving with us when I accepted the position as attending cardiac surgeon at Pinewood Memorial. "It's what family does," she'd said simply, as if uprooting her entire life was no more significant than lending me a cup of sugar. I scribbled a note. "Emergency surgery. Back ASAP. Love you both," and taped it to the refrigerator before slipping out into the pre-dawn darkness. 12 hours and 2 surgeries later, I dragged myself back home, my mind already cataloging everything I needed to do before collapsing. Check Elijah's homework, make dinner, review tomorrow's cases, maybe squeeze in a shower if I was feeling ambitious. Instead, I walked into chaos. My mother sat at our kitchen table, her hands trembling around a mug of tea. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen since my father died. Raw fear mixed with helplessness. "What happened?" I dropped my bag, my surgeon's instinct for crisis management kicking in automatically. "It's Elijah," she said, her voice cracking. "That woman, she put him in a cage, May." "A cage? What woman? What are you talking about?" I felt my pulse quicken, the way it does when a patient starts crashing on the table. "Mrs. Blackwood, the HOA, president from across the street." Mom's voice hardened at the name. "Elijah was playing outside after school. I dozed off, just for a minute, I swear. And when I woke up, he was gone." She took a shuddering breath. "I went looking for him, and I heard him crying from her yard. She had locked him in some kind of dog kennel on her lawn. Said he destroyed one of her precious dahlias." "She did what?" My voice came out unlike anything I've ever heard from myself. Primal. Dangerous. "I tried to get him out, but she wouldn't let me. Said we had to pay for the damage first. Called him a destructive little vandal." Mom's tears started flowing again. "She only released him when I threatened to call the police. But she gave me this." She slid a piece of paper across the table. An official-looking notice with Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association emblazoned across the top. I scanned it, certain I was hallucinating from exhaustion. "Notice of violation and fine. Destruction of award-winning botanical specimen. $150,000. "Is this a joke?" I whispered. "She's very serious," Mom said. "Said if we don't pay within 15 days, she'll put a lien on our house." I set the paper down with the same careful precision I use when placing clamps on a damaged heart. "Where's Elijah now?" "In his room." "He wouldn't eat dinner." "May, he was in there for almost an hour before I found him. In a metal cage, with her Rottweiler barking at him from another kennel just a few feet away." Something inside me. Something I usually keep carefully controlled in the operating room snapped. I found Elijah curled into a tight ball on his bed, still in his school clothes. When I touched his shoulder, he flinched. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, sitting beside him. "Can you talk to me about what happened today?" He looked up, his face blotchy from crying. "I didn't mean to hurt her flowers, Mommy. I was just chasing a butterfly." I swallowed the rage building in my throat. I know, baby. You would never hurt anything on purpose. She said I was bad. That bad children go in cages. His voice was so small. Am I bad? I gathered him into my arms, feeling his little body shaking. No. You are wonderful and kind and good. Mrs. Blackwood was very, very wrong to do what she did. She said you don't take care of me, that grandma is too old. He hiccuped against my chest. She said that's why I'm bad. Something cold and clinical settled over my anger. The same detached focus I summon when a surgery goes sideways. I kissed the top of his head. Mrs. Blackwood doesn't know anything about our family, I said evenly, and I promise you, she will never hurt you again. I didn't charge across the street that night, though every cell in my body screamed for confrontation. Instead, I did what surgeons do best. I formulated a plan. First, I called the police. Officer Rivera arrived within 20 minutes, his expression grave as he listened to our account and examined the photographs my mother had taken of Elijah in the cage. Apparently, she'd had the presence of mind to document the situation before, demanding his release. This is serious, Dr. Chen, he said. False imprisonment of a minor, potential child endangerment. We'll need to take statements from all of you, including Elijah. And then you'll arrest her? I asked. He hesitated. We'll certainly question her. But I should warn you, Mrs. Blackwood has connections in town. Her husband was the mayor before. He passed, and her brother-in-law is a judge. I stared at him. Are you saying she can lock a 6-year-old child in a dog kennel and face no consequences? I'm saying the process might be more complicated than you'd hope. He shifted uncomfortably. Look, I'll file the report, but you should know that in the 3 years I've been responding to calls in Pinewood Heights, no complaint against Victoria Blackwood has ever resulted in charges. After he left, I made 2 more calls. One to the hospital to clear my schedule for the next day, and another to an attorney. $150,000 for a flower? James Harrington, Esquires, whistled into the phone. That's bold, even for Blackwood. You know her? Everyone in Pinewood knows Victoria. She's been president of that HOA for 15 years, uses it like her personal fiefdom. He paused. But imprisoning a child, that's new, even for her. And frankly, it gives us leverage. How so? The HOA has power, too much in my opinion, but they can't actually imprison people. That's criminal. We can use that to fight the ridiculous. Fine. I don't just want to fight the fine, I said, my voice eerily calm. I want justice for my son. Understandable. But Dr. Chen, tread carefully. Victoria Blackwood is not someone you want as an enemy in this town. Too late, I replied. She already made an enemy when she put my son in a cage. The next morning, I stood on Victoria Blackwood's immaculate porch at precisely 8:09 a.m., dressed in the same power suit I wore to hospital board meetings. At my side, James Harrington shifted nervously. Remember, let me do most of the talking, he murmured as the door swung open. Victoria Blackwood was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-60s, expensively maintained, with a blonde helmet of hair, and eyes as cold as surgical steel. She wore gardening gloves and carried pruning shears, as if we'd interrupted important work. Yes, she said, not bothering to hide her irritation. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm James Harrington, attorney at law, and this is my client, Dr. Mei Chen. We're here to discuss the incident involving Dr. Chen's son yesterday. Her eyes flicked over me dismissively. There's nothing to discuss. The boy destroyed a grand champion dahlia worth thousands. The fine stands. Actually, James began, we're not here about the fine. We're here about the false imprisonment of a minor, which, as you may be aware, is a felony in this state. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then she smiled thinly. Don't be ridiculous. I simply contained a destructive trespasser until his guardian arrived. Ask anyone. I'm known for my patience with neighborhood children. I couldn't hold back any longer. "You put my 6-year-old son in a dog kennel." "I removed him from my prize garden before he could do further damage," she countered. "Perhaps if you supervised him properly, or weren't always abandoning him to your elderly mother's inadequate care, none of this would have happened." My hands twitched, fingers instinctively curling as if holding a scalpel. "My son had nightmares. All night." "Do you understand what that kind of trauma does to a developing brain?" she scoffed. "Trauma? In my day, children faced real discipline, not this coddling nonsense. Besides, the real victim here is my Dahlia. Do you have any idea how rare the Blackwood Empress variety is? I developed it myself over 12 years. Named it after yourself, did you?" I couldn't help the jab. Her eyes narrowed. "The flower exhibition is next weekend. I was going to take Best in Show for the 5th consecutive year with that specimen. Your untamed child has destroyed years of work." "We have evidence," James interrupted, pulling out his phone to show her the pictures. "These will be very compelling in court." She glanced at the photos, then shrugged. "Doctored, obviously. And even if they weren't, who do you think the judge will believe? Me, a respected member of this community. For 4 decades, or you—" she looked pointedly at me. "The workaholic foreigner who can't control her child?" The casual racism hit like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Another skill honed in the OR. "I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon at Pinewood Memorial. I save lives for a living, Mrs. Blackwood. What exactly do you do besides terrorize your neighbors?" Her face flushed an unhealthy red. "I protect property values and community standards from people like you who think the rules don't apply to them. That fine stands, Dr. Chen. Pay it or face the consequences." She slammed the door in our faces. "Well," James said after a moment, "that could have gone better." I turned to him, oddly calm. "Actually, I think it went exactly as expected." The next few days established a new kind of warfare on Orchid Lane. Victoria began documenting every perceived violation of HOA rules at our house. The trash can left out 6 minutes past collection time, a single dandelion on our lawn, the unauthorized wind chime my mother had hung on the front porch. Each citation came with another fine, smaller than the first but still outrageous. $500 for the wind chime. $750 for the dandelion. $1,000 for the trash can. Meanwhile, James worked on our counterattack. He filed complaints with the police, the district attorney's office, and even Child Protective Services. As predicted, they all stalled or were mysteriously misplaced. "She's got this town locked down," he admitted during our 3rd strategy session at my kitchen table. "But she's overplaying her hand. Keep documenting everything. We'll build a case." I nodded absently, staring out the window at Victoria's house, where she was meticulously tending to her remaining dahlias. 14 perfect specimens, arranged in a rainbow arc across her front yard. "The flower show," I said suddenly. "When is it exactly?" "This Saturday," James replied. "Why?" "Just curious." I turned back to him. "Let's talk about next steps." On Friday, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number during pre-op rounds. Dr. Chen speaking. "Doctor, this is Nurse Reeves from the ER. We've got an incoming patient you might want to know about. Victoria Blackwood, 67. Possible cardiac event." My hand tightened around the phone. "I'm not on call for the ER today." "I know, doctor, but given the situation between you two, Dr. Patterson thought you should be informed. She's requesting the cardiac surgeon on call be someone else." "Of course," I said automatically. "I understand completely." I hung up, a strange feeling washing over me. Not satisfaction. I would never wish illness on anyone, not even Victoria Blackwood. But something else, something almost like opportunity. Continued my rounds, but my mind kept drifting to the ER 2 floors below, where Victoria Blackwood was likely being prepped for tests and scans. Was she scared? Did she have anyone with her? Did she regret any of her actions, facing her own mortality? By mid-afternoon, I'd heard through hospital gossip that Victoria had suffered not a heart attack, but a severe arrhythmia. She was being prepped for an emergency ablation procedure, a delicate surgery to correct irregular heartbeats by scarring small areas of heart tissue. I knew the procedure well. I'd performed hundreds of them. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone rang again. Dr. Patel, head of cardiology. May, we have a situation. Dr. Ramirez was in a car accident on his way in. He's fine, but he can't perform Mrs. Blackwood's procedure. Everyone else is tied up with the bus crash victims from this morning. My heart skipped a beat. You're not asking me to... I know there's history there. The patient has specifically requested you not be involved. He sounded exhausted. But, May, she's destabilizing. We need to do this procedure now, and you're the only one available with the expertise. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Ethical considerations, hospital policies about conflicts of interest, the Hippocratic Oath. I'll be right down, I heard myself say. Victoria Blackwood looked small and frail on the operating table, stripped of her perfect coiffure and designer clothes. The cardiac monitors showed the chaotic pattern of her heart's electrical misfiring, a deadly rhythm if left untreated. Mrs. Blackwood, I said, approaching her bedside. I'm Dr. Chen. I'll be performing your ablation today. Her eyes flew open, panic replacing the sedative haze. No, not you. I requested specifically. There's no one else available, I said calmly. The other surgeons are handling emergency traumas. I'll wait, she said, trying to sit up before a nurse gently restrained her. Your condition doesn't allow for waiting, Mrs. Blackwood. Your heart is in a dangerous rhythm that could deteriorate into full cardiac arrest at any moment. Fear flickered across her face, raw, human fear that transcended our conflict. For a moment, I saw not the woman who had traumatized my son, but simply a patient in distress. You'd probably love that, wouldn't you? She whispered. The perfect revenge. I looked directly into her eyes. I took an oath to heal, Mrs. Blackwood, not to harm, not even those who harm others. Something passed between us then, an understanding, or perhaps just mutual recognition of the power dynamics at play. Her life was, quite literally, in my hands. The choice is yours, I said quietly. But as your doctor, I strongly advise you to let me perform this procedure. After a long moment, she gave a barely perceptible nod. Prep for general anesthesia, I told the team. We'll use the femoral approach. As the anesthesiologist administered the medication, Victoria's eyes remained fixed on mine, until finally they drifted closed. I took a deep breath and reached for my instruments. 4 hours later, I stepped out of the OR, exhausted but satisfied with the technical success of the procedure. Victoria's heart was beating in a normal rhythm. Again. She would recover, barring complications. James was waiting in the surgical waiting area, pacing nervously. How did it go? He asked. Textbook procedure, I replied. She'll be fine. He studied my face. Was it difficult? Operating on her, I mean. I considered the question. No. In the OR, she wasn't the woman who hurt my son. She was just a heart that needed fixing. You're a better person than I am, he sighed. But that still leaves us with the HOA situation. The flower show is tomorrow, and she'll use her win to solidify her position. She's already telling everyone she'll dedicate her victory to overcoming the trauma of your son's vandalism. I smiled faintly. About that flower show, I don't think Mrs. Blackwood will be attending. She'll discharge herself from this hospital if necessary, James warned. Those flowers are her whole identity. Perhaps, but the flowers won't be there. He stared at me. What did you do? Nothing illegal, I assured him. Let's just say I called in a favor with the city's pest control department. They're conducting an emergency inspection of all properties in Pinewood Heights tonight, following an anonymous tip about a rare and destructive beetle that targets dahlias specifically. James's mouth fell open. You didn't. The inspection protocol requires removal and testing of all suspect plants. Very thorough process. Could take weeks to clear everything. He laughed in disbelief. Mei Chen, you are terrifying. I'm a surgeon, I said simply. We're trained to find alternative solutions when the obvious approach isn't working. Victoria Blackwood remained hospitalized for 3 days. During that time, her precious dahlias were removed by hazmat-suited city workers. Her flower show entry was disqualified, and the HOA board, sensing a shift in power, voted to suspend all outstanding fines pending review. When she returned home, I was waiting on her porch, a small potted plant in my hands. What are you doing here? She demanded weakly, still pale from her ordeal. I came to check on my patient, I said. And to bring you this. She eyed the pot suspiciously. What is it? A dahlia bulb, not your champion variety. Those are gone, I'm afraid. But a new beginning, perhaps. She didn't take it. Is this supposed to be some kind of peace offering? After what you did to my garden? I saved your life, Mrs. Blackwood, I reminded her gently. Your heart was failing. Now it's not. That's the only thing I did. You expect me to believe the timing of that pest inspection was coincidental? Her voice lacked its usual venom, replaced by exhaustion. I set the pot down on her porch table. What I believe, Mrs. Blackwood, is that we're neighbors. We don't have to like each other, but we do have to coexist. My son will continue to play outside. I will continue to save lives at the hospital, possibly even yours again someday. And you can continue to grow your flowers. Just not my prize winners, she said bitterly. Life rarely gives us everything we want, I agreed. I wanted my son to feel safe in his new home. Instead, he has nightmares about being locked in cages. That landed. For the first time, something like shame crossed her features. I may have overreacted, she admitted grudgingly. Yes, you did. And there will be consequences for that. James is filing a civil suit next week. I paused. But the criminal charges, those could potentially be reconsidered if certain conditions are met. Her eyes narrowed. What conditions? First, all HOA fines against my family are permanently withdrawn. Second, you step down as HOA president. Third, you make a public apology. To my son. Impossible, she snapped. You're trying to humiliate me. No, Mrs. Blackwood, I'm trying to teach my son that actions have consequences, but also that forgiveness is possible. I moved toward the steps. Think about it. The civil suit will be expensive and public. Your episode at the hospital is already generating gossip. Sometimes it's better to end a war before both sides suffer irreparable damage. I left her standing there, staring at the small plant I'd brought. A peace offering, a threat, and a reminder, all in one. 3 weeks later, the Pinewood Heights community gathered for its monthly meeting. Victoria Blackwood, still moving gingerly from her surgery, stood before the assembled neighbors. After 15 years of service, I am stepping down as president of the Homeowners Association, she announced, her voice wavering slightly. Age and health concerns make this the right time to pass the torch. Murmurs swept through the crowd. This was unprecedented. Before I go, I have one final matter to address. She cleared her throat. I would like to formally apologize to Elijah Chen and his family for an unfortunate incident involving trespassing and gardening. It wasn't the full public confession I'd hoped for, but it was something. Elijah, sitting beside me, looked confused by the attention. Additionally, Victoria continued, all outstanding fines against the Chen family have been dismissed. The meeting proceeded with the election of a new president, Janet Kim, a retired judge who had recently moved to the neighborhood. Her first act was to propose a community garden where children could learn about plants without fear of punishment. As the meeting dispersed, Victoria approached us hesitantly. "Dr. Chen," she said stiffly, "I fulfilled my end of the bargain." "Yes, you did. Thank you." She knelt with evident difficulty to Elijah's level. "Young man, I'm sorry I scared you. My flowers seemed very important that day, but they weren't. More important than your feelings." Elijah, ever resilient, studied her with curiosity rather than fear. "Are you better now?" "Mommy fixed your heart." Victoria glanced up at me, something almost like respect in her eyes. "Yes, she did. Your mother is very skilled at fixing broken things." "Not just broken hearts," I said quietly. "Sometimes broken communities, too." She rose slowly, wincing at the pull of her surgical incision. "The new dahlia you gave me, it's sprouting. Different from my previous varietals, but it has potential." "New beginnings often do," I agreed. As we walked home, Elijah's hand in mine, he looked up with those perceptive eyes children sometimes have. "Is Mrs. Blackwood your friend now, Mommy?" I considered the complexity of that question. The surgery, the threats, the negotiated truce. "Not exactly, but we understand each other better now." "Because you fixed her heart?" "Yes," I said, realizing the truth of it. "Sometimes healing works in unexpected ways." That night, as I tucked Elijah into bed, I noticed something on his nightstand. A small, bright flower in a plastic cup. "Where did you get that?" I asked. "Mrs. Blackwood gave it to me today. She said it's called a peace blossom." He yawned. "I think that means we're not enemies anymore." I touched the delicate petals. A dahlia, but a common variety. Nothing like her prize specimens. A humble offering from a woman not accustomed to humility. "No more nightmares about cages?" I asked, softly. He shook his head sleepily. "No. Mrs. Blackwood said she threw them all away. She's getting a butterfly garden instead." I kissed his forehead, marveling at children's capacity for forgiveness. A skill many of us lose with age. Outside, through the window, I could see Victoria Blackwood in her yard, carefully tending to a newly turned plot of earth beneath the fading evening light, preparing for something new to grow. Some hearts need more than just surgical repair. Some need the chance to bloom differently than before. Peace in Pinewood Heights lasted exactly 42 days. That's the thing about neighborhoods with HOAs. Tranquility is always temporary, merely the calm before the next bureaucratic storm. I should have known better than to think Victoria Blackwood would simply fade into the background after her public humiliation. The first sign of trouble arrived in the form of Janet Kim, the newly elected HOA president, standing on my doorstep, with an apologetic expression that immediately set off my internal alarms. As a surgeon, I've developed a sixth sense for when bad news is coming. It's the same instinct that tells me a patient is about to crash before the monitors start screaming. "Dr. Chen," she began, clutching a folder to her chest like it contained toxic material. "I'm afraid we have a situation." I invited her in, noting the tension in her shoulders as she perched on the edge of my sofa. Elijah was at school, and my mother was at her new twice-weekly water aerobics class, a small freedom she'd claimed since we'd established our uneasy truce with Victoria. "Victoria Blackwood has filed a motion with the HOA board," Janet said, sliding a document across my coffee table. "She's claiming your recent landscaping changes violate Section 12 of the Covenant." I glanced down at the paper, then out the window at my modest front yard. Last weekend, Elijah and I had planted a small butterfly garden, a few native flowers, some milkweed for monarch caterpillars, and a small stone bench where he could sit and observe. It was barely visible from the street. "That's absurd," I said. "There's nothing in the covenant against butterfly gardens." Janet winced. "Not specifically, no. But there is language about maintaining aesthetic cohesion and approved landscape designs. Victoria is arguing that your garden disrupts the visual harmony of the neighborhood." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same controlled anger I'd experienced when I'd found out about Elijah being caged. This is retaliation. Off the record? Janet leaned forward. Absolutely. But as HOA president, I have to follow procedure. The board will review her complaint at next week's meeting. And until then? Until then, I suggest you prepare your defense. She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, Victoria has been recruiting. 3 new board members are former garden club allies of hers. After Janet left, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the complaint in my hand. The bureaucratic language couldn't disguise what this really was. Victoria Blackwood's opening move in round 2 of our neighborhood chess match. I pulled out my phone and called James. She's coming after my butterfly garden, I said without preamble. His sigh was audible. I was afraid of this. Victoria's not the type to accept defeat gracefully. What's her endgame here? The garden is completely innocuous. It's not about the garden, May. It's about reasserting control. She lost face in the community. She needs to prove she can still pull strings from behind the scenes. I tapped my fingers against the counter, thinking, the board meeting is next Thursday. Can you be there? I'll clear my schedule. He paused. How's Elijah doing? The question caught me off guard. In the weeks since the incident, Elijah had seemed to bounce back with the resilience unique to children. The nightmares had stopped. He'd even waved at Victoria when we passed her house yesterday. He's doing well. Better than I am, apparently. Kids are adaptable. Adults hold grudges. Another pause. Speaking of which, how is your own recovery going? Recovery? From performing life-saving surgery on the woman who traumatized your son, he clarified. That's not something they teach you how to process in medical school, I imagine. I hadn't really thought about it that way. In the OR, I'd compartmentalized. Victoria Blackwood wasn't the HOA tyrant, just another patient needing my expertise. But afterward? I'm fine, I said automatically. May, James's voice softened. You saved the life of someone who hurt your child. That's complicated territory. I stared out the window at the butterfly garden Elijah had been so excited to build. Yesterday, the first monarch had visited. Elijah had been ecstatic, calling it a sign that we were officially welcomed by nature. Now Victoria wanted to take that small joy away from him. Actually, I said slowly, I don't think it's complicated at all. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige, inoffensive building that perfectly embodied the bland conformity Victoria Blackwood had enforced for 15 years. The room was unexpectedly packed. Word had spread about the latest Chen Blackwood conflict, and neighbors had turned out in force to witness the spectacle. Victoria sat in the front row, her posture rigidly perfect despite her recent surgery. She didn't turn when I entered, but I could see the slight tightening of her shoulders that acknowledged my presence. Janet called the meeting to order, moving efficiently through the agenda until reaching item 7. Landscape Compliance Review, 2157. Orchid Lane. Victoria rose smoothly, armed with a tablet and laser pointer. She'd prepared a presentation, complete with close-up photos of my butterfly garden taken from various angles. As you can see, she said, her voice carrying that authoritative edge that had likely intimidated dozens of homeowners before me. The Chen residence has installed an unauthorized wildlife habitat in clear violation of our neighborhood aesthetic guidelines. She clicked through several more photos, highlighting the chaotic arrangement of native plants and the rustic bench that clashed with our community's refined image. Furthermore, she continued, these plants attract insects, specifically butterflies, which could become a nuisance to adjacent properties. A murmur ran through the audience at this last statement. Even Victoria's supporters seemed to recognize the absurdity of classifying butterflies as pests. James leaned close to my ear. She's overplaying her hand, he whispered. Let her keep going. Victoria concluded her presentation with a solemn declaration that maintaining property values requires vigilance against even small deviations from our standards. When she sat down, Janet nodded toward me. Dr. Chen, would you like to respond to these concerns? I stood, but instead of moving to the front, I remained beside my seat. No presentations, no prepared statements. Just truth. 3 months ago, I began, my voice steady, my son accidentally damaged one of Mrs. Blackwood's prized dahlias while chasing a butterfly. For that minor, childish mistake, he was locked in a dog kennel for over an hour. Gasps rippled through the room. The incident had been alluded to in gossip, but many were hearing the explicit details for the first time. After that traumatic experience, my 6-year-old developed nightmares and a fear of our own backyard. The butterfly garden was his idea, a way to reclaim his sense of safety and joy in our new home. I looked directly at Victoria, whose face had gone pale. The irony that Mrs. Blackwood now objects to a garden meant to attract the very butterflies my son was chasing when he damaged her flower. Well, it speaks for itself. The room had gone completely silent. As for compliance with HOA regulations, I continued, I've distributed copies of the exact covenant language regarding landscaping, along with photographs of 7 other properties in Pinewood Heights with similar butterfly gardens, including notably the home of board member Douglas Wilson. Douglas, a silver-haired man seated at the board table, had the grace to look embarrassed. So my question is simple. Is this really about landscaping guidelines, or is it about something else entirely? I sat down. James squeezed my arm in silent approval. Janet cleared her throat. Thank you, Dr. Chen. Does anyone else wish to speak on this matter before the board deliberates? To everyone's surprise, a hand went up in the back of the room. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who rarely attended meetings, slowly made her way to the front. I've lived in Pinewood Heights for 28 years, she began, her voice quavering. Slightly. I've seen 5 HOA presidents come and go, and I've never spoken at a meeting before because, frankly, they terrified me. She turned to face the audience rather than the board. But I can't stay silent about this. For years I've been afraid to plant the roses I love because they didn't fit the approved plant list. My late husband's memorial bench had to be removed from our front yard because it wasn't the right style. She gestured toward Victoria. We've all lived under these arbitrary rules for too long. Dr. Chen saved Mrs. Blackwood's life. I know because my daughter is a nurse at the hospital. And this is how she's repaid? By attacking a child's butterfly garden? Victoria stood abruptly. This is about rules, not personal. Sit down, Victoria, Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted, with a sharpness that stunned the room. For once in your life, stop talking and listen. To my astonishment, Victoria did exactly that. Mrs. Rodriguez continued, her voice gathering strength. I say we put it to a community vote, not just about this butterfly garden, but about revising all these nitpicky landscape rules. Let people plant what brings them joy, as long as it's maintained and doesn't hurt anyone. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then building to a crescendo. Janet, looking both overwhelmed and relieved, called for an impromptu vote. The result was overwhelming. 37 in favor of allowing the butterfly garden and reviewing landscape regulations, 4 against. As the meeting adjourned, Victoria slipped out a side door, avoiding the cluster of neighbors who had gathered around me with stories of their own HOA grievances and suppressed gardening dreams. James grinned as he helped me gather my documents. That, he said, was surgical precision without a scalpel. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt oddly hollow, watching Victoria's retreating figure through the window. This victory brought no satisfaction, just the weary recognition that we were locked in a cycle neither of us seemed able to break. The next morning, I was paged for an emergency at the hospital. A transplant heart had become available for a long-waiting patient, and I needed to perform the procurement surgery. By the time I arrived home, it was past midnight. As I wearily climbed out of my car, something caught my eye. A small light glowing in my butterfly garden. Cautiously I approached, wondering if neighborhood kids were playing a prank. Instead, I found Victoria Blackwood kneeling beside Elijah's stone bench, placing a small solar lantern among the plants. "Mrs. Blackwood?" I said, startling her so badly she nearly toppled over. "Dr. Chen." She straightened, brushing dirt from her expensive slacks. "I was just trespassing in my garden at midnight," I supplied, too exhausted for diplomacy. She flinched. "I suppose I deserve that." An awkward silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant sound of cicadas. "What are you doing here, Victoria?" I finally asked. She gestured to the solar light, now glowing a soft blue among the milkweed. "I thought the garden could use some illumination for the evening pollinators." Of all the responses I'd expected, this ranked somewhere below alien. Abduction on my list of possibilities. "Evening pollinators," I repeated. She sighed, suddenly looking every bit her age. "I couldn't sleep. After that meeting, I kept thinking about what Mrs. Rodriguez said. About joy." I said nothing, waiting. "Gardening was my joy once," she continued, her voice taking on a distant quality. "Before it became about competitions and proving something. When Harold, my husband, was alive, we used to garden together. He loved butterflies. Used to call them flying flowers." She shook her head, as if surprised by her own sentimentality. "Anyway, I saw these solar lights at the garden center. Thought they might attract moths for your son's garden. Nighttime pollinators are underappreciated." I was too stunned to formulate a response. Victoria Blackwood, Midnight Garden Fairy, delivering solar lights for moths? Had I fallen asleep at the wheel and crashed into an alternate dimension? "I should go," she said, interpreting my silence as rejection. "I apologize for the intrusion." As she moved to leave, I found my voice. "Why now, Victoria? After everything?" She paused, her back to me. "When you're facing your own mortality, priorities shift. Having your heart literally in someone else's hands, it changes perspective." She turned slightly, her profile silver in the moonlight. "I've spent 15 years policing other people's lives while my own grew emptier. Today I realized everyone in that room either feared or despised me. That's not the legacy Harold would have wanted for me." I thought about the countless hours I'd spent in operating rooms, holding failing hearts, how each one contained a lifetime of loves and regrets, and unrealized dreams. How little those external trappings mattered when the muscle that kept everything going began to fail. "The light is lovely," I said finally. "Thank you." She nodded once, sharply, then moved past me toward the street. "Victoria," I called after her, surprising myself. "Elijah has been asking about butterfly metamorphosis, if you have any expertise to share. Perhaps you could stop by sometime. When he's awake." She went very still. "Are you sure that's wise?" "Probably not," I admitted. "But maybe it's necessary. For both of you. Change, like healing, rarely follows a linear path." Victoria Blackwood did not transform overnight from neighborhood tyrant to beloved butterfly enthusiast. But small shifts began to appear in the fabric of our coexistence. The first time she came by, officially in daylight, to show Elijah her collection of mounted butterfly specimens, he was wary, hiding partially behind my legs. By the third visit, when she brought chrysalis enclosures so he could watch the transformation process, he was eagerly asking questions about migration patterns and wing pigmentation. "She knows a lot about bugs," he confided to me one evening as I tucked him in. "But she's still kind of scary." "Adults can be complicated," I told him. "Sometimes they're stuck in chrysalis for a very long time." "Will Mrs. Blackwood ever turn into a butterfly?" he asked sleepily. I smiled in the darkness. "I think she's working on it." The neighborhood, too, began a slow metamorphosis. Janet's promised review of the landscaping regulations resulted in a dramatically simplified set of guidelines that emphasized maintenance rather than conformity. Gardens bloomed with previously forbidden varieties. Mrs. Rodriguez planted her long-desired rose garden. Mr. Wilson installed a koi pond. Meanwhile, Victoria retreated from HOA politics, focusing instead on establishing a community butterfly way station in the previously underutilized park at the center of the development. She worked alone at first, stubbornly hauling mulch and plants despite her still-healing sternum. I found myself stopping by occasionally on my way home from the hospital, first just to ensure she wasn't overtaxing her heart, later to help with the heavier tasks. We worked mostly in silence, an unspoken truce built on the shared language of nurturing living things. "You have good hands," she commented one evening as I carefully transplanted milkweed seedlings. "Steady. Useful in both gardens and operating rooms," I replied. She nodded thoughtfully. "I've been meaning to ask you something. That day, during my surgery, you could have made choices no one would have known." I set down my trowel, giving her my full attention. "I would have known. But after what I did to your son—" "What you did was unforgivable," I said quietly. "But that doesn't mean you're beyond redemption, or that I would compromise everything I am for revenge." She absorbed this in silence, her fingers absently tracing the scar beneath her collarbone. "You're a better person than I was." "Was?" I raised an eyebrow. A hint of her old sharpness returned. "I'm trying, Dr. Chen. Metamorphosis is a painful process." We returned to our planting, the silence now companionable rather than strained. 6 months after Victoria Blackwood locked my son in a dog kennel, Pinewood Heights held its first butterfly festival. The community park, once an overlooked patch of grass, had been transformed into an urban oasis of native plants, winding paths, and educational displays. Elijah, now officially the youngest member of the newly formed Junior Naturalist Club, proudly led tours of the butterfly enclosure, pointing out different species with the expertise of a seasoned entomologist. My mother, who had once been afraid to hang wind chimes without permission, now coordinated the refreshment committee with cheerful authority. I stood at the edge of the gathering, taking a rare moment to simply observe. These were my neighbors, my community, no longer faceless rule enforcers or potential complainants, but individuals with their own stories and passions. "Quite the transformation," James said, appearing beside me with 2 cups of lemonade. He handed me one, nodding toward the center of the garden where Victoria was showing a group of children how to use a butterfly identification guide. "From neighborhood villain to butterfly whisperer," I agreed. "I wouldn't have predicted it." "People can surprise you." He took a sip of his lemonade, studying me over the rim of his cup. "You've been good for this community, May. You stood your ground when it mattered." I watched as Elijah ran up to Victoria, excitedly pointing to something in his cupped hands. She bent carefully to look, then nodded approvingly. Whatever truce had formed between them wasn't quite friendship, but it was healing, for both of them. "Sometimes standing your ground isn't enough," I said. "Sometimes you have to create new ground entirely." In the center of the garden, a plaque had been installed just that morning. It read, "The Pinewood Heights Butterfly Sanctuary, where second chances take flight." Established in 2023, Victoria had insisted on the wording, though she'd refused to have her name included as founder. "Some transformation should happen quietly," she'd said when I questioned the omission. I understood. As a surgeon, I'd learned that the most profound healings often happen beneath the surface, invisible to casual observers. The scarred heart still beating. The chrysalis outwardly unchanged, while inside cells rearrange into something entirely new. "Dr. Chen," Victoria called, gesturing me over. "Your son has found a question I can't answer about cardiac implications for migrating monarchs. Your expertise is required." I smiled, setting down my lemonade. Some hearts need more than surgical repair. Some need the chance to bloom differently than before. And sometimes, the most surprising second chances are the ones we give to others. That evening, as Elijah slept, surrounded by his growing collection of butterfly books, I sat on our front porch, enjoying the rare quiet of a day without emergencies, either medical or neighborly. A familiar figure approached along the sidewalk, moving carefully but purposefully. Victoria, making her evening rounds of the butterfly garden as she did each night, checking for signs of distress among her plants. She paused at the edge of my yard, offering a tentative nod. I returned the gesture, lifting my wine glass slightly in acknowledgement. She continued on her way, pausing to deadhead a spent bloom before disappearing around the corner. We weren't friends, perhaps we never would be. Too much had happened between us for that. But we had found something perhaps more valuable: respect. The recognition that growth comes in unexpected forms, often through the most painful transformations. In the hospital, I rebuilt hearts with surgical steel and careful sutures. Here, in Pinewood Heights, the healing was messier, less controlled, but no less profound. My phone buzzed with a text message from the hospital. Another emergency, another heart in crisis. I stood, gathering my things, ready to step back into my other world of blue scrubs and beating muscles. As I turned to go inside, I caught a glimpse of something fluttering near the porch light. A small moth, its wings working steadily against the night air. Not as flashy as a butterfly, but just as essential to the garden's ecosystem. Pollinating in darkness, doing its quiet, necessary work when most of the world slept. I smiled to myself. Sometimes the most important transformations happen in the dark.